Hello, my name is James Ellsmore. I grew up and still live on our family farm in the north of England, in a place, a county called Shropshire. It's about 1 hour south of Manchester and not far from the Welsh border. I'm be answering a few questions about our farm. Note that I'm not a full-time farmer. My dad is. I work in other industries, but I've grown up on the farm. I spend a lot of time there, so I'll do my best to answer these in the best way possible. So, question one: how has farming in Shropshire changed in your lifetime? Well, I'm 25, so perhaps won't have a long time span to compare about. In in my mind, um, I guess even over my lifespan, I've seen a lot of the farms in our village close. I mean, we're the only working farm left in our village, and we haven't really grown. But a lot of the other farms or the fields, the farmhouses themselves, were turned into housing, and the fields have been taken over by neighbouring farms. So I'm sure the average size of farms where we live is growing very rapidly. I think in England, farmers in general have quite a small, sorry, I should say having a small farm is quite difficult. I mean, we have other businesses that we do to supplement our income, um, and and uh, and I think it will be difficult. I think most farms in the future are going to be growing and growing. That's the current tendency. Question two: help us understand your farm business. Tell us about your operation and how it runs. Um, so we have a mixed farm. We have cattle, we have sheep. We grow wheat and barley, and occasionally canola, or we call canola oilseed rape. Has different terms in different countries. So we're very mixed. We've lived on in the farmhouse for about 100 years. My family have lived in the area for hundreds of years, and my great granddad bought the farm just after World War I, when many of the estates in England, the large historic estates where individuals owned huge parts of the country, were starting to break up, which you may know if you've watched Downton Abbey. Question three: what are your largest challenges on the farm today? I mean, I think it's always making a profit, making the business viable, and we're in a very uncertain time right now in the UK with Brexit. So subsidies form a very important part of the UK agricultural industry and have been kind of propping up the industry for a long time. The subsidies are dictated by the European Union, and so as we leave the European Union, we'll be having a significant change over the next few years. And I think that uncertainty is a bit of a challenge. I mean, my dad is starting to think about retirement, so it may just push him into retirement, and then we'll have kind of some serious questions to think about for the future of the farm. I'm an only child, and so there's a lot of pressure for me to take on the farm, but not necessarily what I want to do. And something that, with a farm of our relatively small size, which is 220 acres, about 100 hectares, that's a small farm in England, and it will be difficult for me to make a decent living off that alone. Question four: do you think the normal business model of farming is changing? In the UK, there's a big push and pull between, I guess, environmentalism and food production. And I think it's difficult to find the proper balance between those, although we try our best. We have a lot of environmental practices on the farm, and a lot of the old school farmers don't necessarily like that. They don't necessarily like being paid to um, dig ponds or make wildlife habitats. They like being paid to produce food because that's their jobs. But I think there's a growing recognition that we need to do both. We need to preserve the wildlife, we need to encourage wild animals, and we need to also produce food. I am concerned about future food security. I mean, we live in a globalized world, and if our food import channels were suddenly cut off tomorrow in the UK, we wouldn't be able to feed ourselves. And I think that that's a really scary prospect, because we live in such an unstable world. You never know what could happen in the next few years, or even longer, in the next few decades, really. So I always think that we should be working towards food security, making sure that we can grow enough food at home, but trying to balance that with preserving wildlife, to the best extent we can. So question number 5, what are the differences between England and other farms around the world? Well, even in England we have a lot of diversity, and obviously there's a very broad question, so there are many ways to answer that. I lived in the United States for a while, where farms are much larger in general. We don't have that space in England in general to have these huge farms. So often, I mean, our farm itself is the size of the field of a single field in many farms in the Midwest of Canada, or in the Midwest of the US, or Canada rather. At the same time, I recognize that our farm is much larger than farms would be in some parts of the world as well, where people make an existence off less than a hundredth of the size of what we have. So it's all relative, I guess. What are the differences? I mean, the crops is one obvious difference, the things that we're able to grow. The British climate is very wet, which is good for some crops, but also does make it challenging. It's very unreliable and predictable, so that's part of the reason that subsidies exist, to help make sure that we have a steady income from one year to the next, because crops can be damaged and do vary according to the weather. So I think the climate has a big impact in the UK. And then also the policies. The UK is not a very agricultural country. Even within Europe, you look to France and Italy, and those countries have much more of a high reliance on agriculture and primary production. In the UK, we don't. We are a very service-oriented economy, and so the politics are less interested in agriculture. We tend to look at the countryside as a place to spend the weekend, as opposed to a working and living place, and so that does impact how farmers are viewed by the country, and how we interact with the rest of the population. And you definitely don't get that in other parts of Europe, that where agriculture is much more central and seen as important. If I could tell the public anything, what would it be? I think one message I have is it frustrates me when I see farmers being blamed for everything in the supermarkets. Whether it's what products are being used, or things like fertilizers, things like certain medicines for animals, anything like that. I think it's really easy to blame the farmer, and the farmer in some cases does deserve blame. It's not saying that farmers should be completely off the hook, but farmers in general respond to market pressure, and we do what we have to make a living. It's really easy to say we should all go organic, or we should all we should all embrace a certain practice, but the reality is that the majority of the population of any country want cheap food, and so we can't all go organic tomorrow. As much as we would love to. Farmers want the best welfare for their animals, they want the best environmental practices, but they have to balance that with earning a living, because having a perfect environment is not always possible because of the costs associated with that. And I think most farmers really try and get that balance right, but it's not an easy thing to do. So I guess I'd like the public, the public needs to acknowledge that if we want the best standards, they have to be willing to pay more, whether that's at the supermarket or through subsidies for environmental practices, but farmers need to be able to make a living. And the other point is on organics. I do support organic food. I think organics are great, but I think practically there's probably an optimum that is low use of pesticides and low use of fertilizers, but not banning them altogether. And the reason I say that is that I've heard statistics such as if we all want to go organic in Europe, we'd have to chop down all of our remaining forests because we have less because organic farms are less productive than non-organic farms, and so and also just that people to keep up the enough production, people aren't necessarily willing to pay the premium needed for organics. So I think it's easy if you're from a comfortable background and you have the money to tell everyone to go organic, but we have to, again, it's a balance. I'm not saying one way or another. We need to just try and find a way that we can do what's best for the wider environment and the country.